Okay, welcome back, everyone. In the first section, we sought to provide you some context and background to smart local energy systems and the work that not only was done in the concept projects in PFER, but also in the thinking that we've been doing in the Catapult about how to organise and some of the complexity around addressing this fascinating topic. In the second session, as I promised, we're going to look at in some depth at key themes from the projects, which are structured around the aspects of integration, which John talked about a bit earlier. So what I will say now, though, is I'll be handing over to Gordon Graham, who will be guiding us through the rest of the event, and but in the first instance, it's Sarah Keay Bright who's going to talk to us about legislation.
Okay, thank you, Eric. So I think when we think about markets policy and regulation, a really good starting point is to think about the benefits of smart local energy systems, because this is why we are talking about SLES. And it's about unlocking those benefits through market design and policy regulatory frameworks. So there are multiple benefits that can be unlocked, and just a few here, but they can play a significant role in supporting the integration of renewable variable renewable energy, local carbon technologies, and unlock demand-side flexibility. For networks, the losses can be reduced, investment can be deferred, and it can support active network management. And finally, for consumers, all of this should mean lower costs and therefore lower bills. And part of it is empowering consumers, and through doing that, further reduce bills. And of course, support the local objectives, which can be multiple. So many benefits, many of them not here, but it can include air quality and jobs, and many other things. So moving on, when we think about smart local energy markets, there are various archetypes that already exist and are emerging. For example, local customer service provision, microgrids, virtual power networks, peer-to-peer platforms, and so on. So it's useful to think about generic features and design aspects when we think about local energy markets. And these include, for example, the attribute being traded, the market participants involved and the role that they play, and the type of market signals and the extent of control of assets exercised through market mechanisms. The Energy Systems Catapult last year published a useful publication, there on the right, policy and regulatory context for new local energy markets. And this is a really useful background document that explains these sorts of concepts, but also gives a really good overview of policy and market challenges and the current state of play in relation to market design and the policy regulatory framework. So moving on. The report that's being released on smart local energy systems composition that was mentioned earlier, in the analysis of the concepts, it was identified that market policy and regulatory conditions are a barrier to the innovative approaches. And at the high level, at the overarching level, what was highlighted was insufficient speed of progress, uncoordinated implementation, and these two things link very closely to high policy risk and uncertainty. So this is very challenging in developing business models, and underlines the importance of trying to develop robust business models. When it comes to specific areas of concern, there were three that were highlighted: electricity network reforms, retail market barriers, and heat policy incentive changes. And this is probably a good time to mention the PFER Policy and Regulatory Working Group that was established earlier this year, that is open to all PFER projects, and that has been meeting fairly regularly, at least every quarter. And as part of the discussions in this group, two of those specific areas have been taken up in, and now subgroups are working on those for network charging and renewable heat. Moving on. So in the 10 minutes, it's really difficult to give you an overview of the policy and regulatory challenges, but this slide attempts to do that. And as I said before, that publication really gives much more detailed background. But in the electricity sector, what we see are network charge reform impact and timing being quite problematic, slow and uncoordinated. The supplier hub model and industry codes restricting innovation, and the progress is quite slow. Limited flexibility and locational value revealed in markets. We need system reflective prices, and barriers that are being removed, but many remain for distributed energy resources, aggregators and non-generation. Need equal treatment of energy resources. And we need more efficient system system operation and an active distribution system operation. Moving on to heat in the middle there. Top of the list, really, I suppose, is lack of long-term heat strategy. There are changes happening to support policies, mechanisms which are negatively impacting the deployment, need to be well coordinated. The Future Home Standard not being stringent enough. There are differentials in carbon prices across the different vectors, particularly stark for residential gas versus electricity. And when we look at the RIIO price control, there's a need for stronger incentives to make sure that the development of networks for heat, gas, electricity is efficient, and we get the right kind of investment. Moving to the far right on mobility. Smart charging is critical for the integration of electric vehicles to the power sector. And this involves multiple challenges, reforms and requirements of reforms to network charges, market design, industry codes, smart meter rollout, and better consumer information. We also need more coordinated infrastructure planning across sectors and bringing together the local and national levels to make sure that we develop the charging infrastructure efficiently and enable the anticipatory investment. And standards and codes are critical in this area for interoperability and data sharing. Moving on, I'll give you a quick overview of the current policy regulatory landscape. And there is a lot of change happening here. It's highly relevant to all the PFER projects. And as I mentioned earlier, many of the projects actually are proposing their own market design or policy regulatory proposals, which might look quite different to what is currently on the table. But to give a quick overview here on the far left, under electricity, there is work going on for the DNO-DSO transformation and in relation to DSO-ESO coordination for system operation. There are reforms going on with the balancing and ancillary services markets. Network charging reforms are underway, as well as development of the next RIIO price control. And half-hourly settlement reform has been underway for quite a long time, quite slow, but it's getting there. And there has been consultation and some development on retail market reforms, still waiting for concrete proposals. In the middle there on heat, yes, some progress on future home standards. Support policies for low carbon heat solutions are being developed. Some energy efficiency improvements and network regulation is being developed now for heat networks in particular. There is the development underway, as we understand, for long-term heat strategy. They're yet to be published. And the Treasury is undertaking a review for funding models for net zero, which hopefully will look at sort of the carbon price signals that are across vectors and sectors. And on the far right, we currently have live a consultation on the ban of sale of internal combustion engine vehicles. There are minimum requirements for charge points, including smart charging functionality. And work underway on infrastructure development incentives plans that's come from the EU Clean Energy Package. So there are a number of things that are happening, but it's a fast-moving and changing policy landscape. Next slide. In a nutshell, though, it's fair to say that markets policy and the regulatory framework they do need to be become more agile and better coordinated. And we need a strong long-term vision in order to support innovative propositions as can be offered through smart local energy systems. Critical for local energy markets are the development of coherent and granular price signals by time and location, reflecting the status and physics of the power system. And this will help optimize resource use in line with PFER and public policy objectives. And finally, the policy uncertainty and the policy change that we're witnessing is really challenging when you're developing business models. So improved policy development, coordination and governance was mentioned earlier, but this would make a really big difference for the PFER projects and for developing policy in the future. And finally, we are continuing to work with the projects to capture and communicate the policy issues, the learnings, insights through the PFER policy and regulatory working group that I mentioned earlier. And this is a conduit to the Energy Rev Policy Contact Group, where there is direct connection or interaction with the authorities or the decision makers, such as BEIS, Ofgem, and we have already had direct discussions on network charging. And the Energy Systems Catapult is conducting quite a lot of thought leadership in various areas that are highly relevant to smart local energy systems, which could be a useful resource for the projects. There's a lot already available on our website, but the areas that we're focusing on right now are electricity market design, economy-wide carbon policy, local area energy planning, and zero carbon buildings.
Do you think the barriers currently experienced with Ofgem will be removed to aid local systems to be integrated into the grids? Sarah, what's your view?
I'm not sure I fully understand that question, what barriers with Ofgem we're talking about. But I'm assuming, though, that it does relate to, this was earlier before I even did my presentation, I saw that question. And I had two slides there. One was like the challenges that we face today. And the second slide was relating to the policy change landscape. So, yeah, plenty of barriers, plenty of issues that exist. I think I got that message across. And you know, there is some progress clearly, but there's a long way to go, and the PFER projects themselves, many of them looking at these areas and will have proposals themselves. So so it's interesting times. I'm not sure if I've answered the question adequately, but I didn't fully understand the detail of it.
That's right, Sarah. If the individual who's on the line has a further clarification for us, please do drop it in and I'll pick it up with Sarah again. The next question, Sarah, was, can you tell us a bit more about the outcomes being achieved by the Policy and Regulation Working Group?
Okay, well, it's very early days. The working group was only set up in February, I think, and the subgroups themselves have only just emerged. The network charging one is much further on. That is because the network charging reforms are significant, they're live, and there has been quite a lot of discussion around the targeted charging review because the network charging reforms were split into two parts. We're now looking at forward-looking charges and network access charges, but so the group, you know, has taken up those issues, already had a direct bilateral with Ofgem recently, presenting the evidence and presenting the common issues that they found. And we have helped them develop the story, the case studies. It's very interesting because you know, we have the demonstrator projects that are physical, and then you know, the designs that are on paper, they're not yet physical. So the demonstrators, you know, can be materially impacted. Their funding models can be impacted by change. But what was very interesting, one of the projects, and this is actually Energy Superhub Oxford, which the very purpose of the project is to connect distributed assets directly to the transmission system, and its purpose is to look at how you might use a transmission system differently in the future. So the way that the targeted charging review sort of decision has impacted it is very interesting because it's based perhaps on the past, whereas we're looking to the future and you know, exploring future options, and that is exactly why we have these projects. And so this discussion is really timely and relevant. But there will be many more outcomes to come, and I would encourage all the projects to get involved.